Welcome to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies.
The Bridge Between the Scientific and the Spiritual. Abdul S. Hassam. Dr. Hassam is Professor of Education and Social Sciences at Columbia Pacific University and Visiting Professor in the Center for Policy and Future Studies and the Institute of Islamic Studies at East West University, Chicago, Illinois. The paper which follows was presented at the 35th Annual Conference of Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship International at Black Mountain, North Carolina, in June 1991. It may reflect the language and attitudes of the time in which it was written. Responsibility for opinions expressed herein rests solely with the author, and such opinions must not be taken to represent those of the CFPSS. Understanding the bridge between the scientific and the spiritual, amongst other issues, requires us to answer the question of relationship between the sacred and the profane. And that is not a question that Western materialistic society is suited to answer gracefully. Reductionist science, philosophical materialism, and secular humanism have cruelly divided the integrity of our being between heaven and hell, nature and grace, intellect and reason, mind and matter. The bridge between the scientific and the spiritual in the Western heritage has been an interplay of dichotomies and extremes placed diametrically opposite. In the earliest phase of history, the origins of man's religious aspirations are to be found in what we now call science. The study of mythology and primitive psychology suggests that magic in various forms started various trains of thought in primitive man by which he achieved what seemed to him to be rational accounts of the natural phenomena around him. It seemed to him rational that these phenomena, these events like the rising and the setting of the sun, the passage of the seasons, the flowering of the bud and the ripening of the fruit, the wind and the rain, were caused and controlled by the deities or superior beings. Primitive religious experience and primitive scientific reasoning were linked together in magic, and in wizardry. Thus at one and the same time mankind's experience in the realm of sensation and his striving to explain and coordinate those experiences in terms of his mind, led to the birth of both science and religion. The two remained linked throughout prehistoric and ancient times, and in the life of early societies of which we have knowledge. It was difficult to separate what may be called proto-religion from proto-science. They made their journey like two streams, sometimes mingling, sometimes separating, but running side by side. René Weber says, "Science was not born only of the utilitarian side of man's nature, the need for mapping, navigation or agriculture, but from curiosity, man's need to know. In the beginning there was wonder and awe. These inspired the search with which science and religion began." She explains further by saying that initially there was an underlying sense of unity between the scientific and the spiritual until they became separated in modern times. She asserts that from the point of separation, the sense of wonder became science, and the sense of awe, mysticism. Margaret Boden, a noted philosopher and psychologist, states that wonder is a prime component of the religious sentiment and explains that science grows from wonder, and wonder is closely related also to awe and worship, for awe is a high degree of wonder. She argues that wonder, awe, is the substratum of the force which eventually leads to the religious experience and understanding, which drives science. If these two elements, wonder and understanding, are placed diametrically opposite, that is, if wonder is only limited to the realms of magic or mysteries, then science and religion will also stand in opposition. So, Boden says that the aim of science is to explain how something is possible, but understanding how something is possible need not destroy our wonder of it. The link between science and religion was mentioned earlier in terms of the sacred and the profane. Theodore Roszak says, "The profane is a sacred theme varied beyond recognition." He explains the spiritual by linking myth, magic, and mystery in a sacred triangle pointing upward towards heaven, symbolizing the transcendent experience. The profanation of these sacred sciences have led them to be desacralized in such a way that their true meaning is now veiled from the human intellect. Myth, which governs the encounter of the person with time, hence mortality, has now become a substitute for falsehood and fairy tales. Magic, which governs the encounter of the person with nature, has been transformed to theatrical tricks and the art of clever deception. Mystery, which governs the search for the self, with a capital S, within the self, the process of spiritual rebirth, has been metamorphosed to a puzzle to be resolved in detective fiction, or to some hidden obscenity to be made public. Instead, what we now have is, in place of myth, history, in place of magic, technology, and in place of mystery, reason. An inverted triangle pointing downwards towards the earth. Away from heaven, a profane triangle, an inversion of the sacred triangle. In the Orient, knowledge has always been related to spiritual perfection. To know has meant ultimately to be transformed by the very process of knowing, as the Western tradition was also to assert over the ages before it was eclipsed by the post-medieval secularization and humanism, which forced the separation of knowing from being and intelligence from the sacred. The Oriental sage has always embodied spiritual perfection. Intelligence has been seen ultimately as a sacrament, and knowledge has been irrevocably related to the sacred and its actualization in the being of the knower. One of the causes of the desacralization of myth, magic, and mystery to history, technology, and reason, is the result of the interpretation of these sacred sciences by countless Western students of the Orient during the course of the past 2 centuries. Through historicism, evolutionism, scientism and many other means, the sacred was reduced to the profane. Most modern scholarly works concerned with the East are in fact the fruit of a secularized reason analyzing and studying traditions of a sacred character. Man is, of course, from a certain point of view, the rational being defined by the philosophies, but the rational faculty which is at once an extension and reflection of the intellect can become a Luciferian force and instrument if divorced from intellect and revelation which alone bestow upon knowledge its numinous quality and sacred content. The reduction of the intellect to reason and the limitation of intelligence to cunning cleverness in the modern world not only caused sacred knowledge to become inaccessible and to some even meaningless, as is the case with myth, magic and mystery, but it also destroyed the natural theology which in the Christian context represented at least a reflection of knowledge of a sacred order, of the wisdom of sapientia which was the central means of spiritual perfection and deliverance. Natural theology, which was originally sapientia as understood by Plato in the Republic and Laws, and which was later reduced by Saint Augustine and other Christian authorities to an inferior but nevertheless valuable form of knowledge of things divine, was completely banished from the citadel of both science and faith, as the process of desacralization of knowledge, and the reduction of reason to a purely human and, this worldly, instrument of perception, reached its terminal point with the last phases of development of modern Western philosophy. As a result of the loss of the sapiental perspective in modern times and the desacralization of knowledge, however, not only has natural theology been cast aside as irrelevant, but logic and mathematics have been so divorced from concern with the sacred that they have come to be used as the primary tools for the secularization and profanation of the very act and process of knowing. Was logic and mathematics, then, in the past associated with the sacred? The evidence was overwhelming. What did Pythagoras mean when he aid God geometrizes? What did Galileo have in mind when he asserted, God's book of nature is written in the alphabet of mathematics? One may confidently deduce that for Pythagoras and Galileo, mathematical theories and equation appear to have been something of a code word which corresponds to aspects of objective reality. Both logic and mathematics have a sacred character and a liaison with the divine. Physicist and Nobel laureate Richard Feynman may have echoed a similar idea when he wrote, "To those who do not know mathematics, it is difficult to get across a real feeling as to the beauty, the deepest beauty, of nature. Since the bridge between the scientific and the spiritual requires a more profound understanding of the essential meaning and role of intelligence and reason, by means of which man seeks to master the world, further elaboration is here necessary. The intellect is the faculty that knows immediately and totally, whose function it is to know the principle of things leading ultimately to synthesis and union. As for the reason, whose Latin root, ratio, reveals its function of analysis and division, it is like the shadow and reflection of the intellect. If it remains subservient to the intellect and also to revelation, then it is a positive instrument that can aid man to journey from multiplicity to unity. As such, the mind becomes the locus of the presence of the divine spirit. But if it rebels against its own source, against both the intellect and revelation, then it becomes the source of disharmony and dissolution. I will therefore argue here that if the intellect remains wholesome and functions normally, and by wholesome here I mean, by virtue of the acceptance of a revelation, whose function is to remove those obstacles that prevent the intelligence from functioning in a wholesome manner, then modern science and philosophy as we know it today can only be taken as being the reflection of the spiritual in the material plane of manifestation through reason, which in this case, as alluded to earlier, is taken to be the reflection of the intellect in the mirror of the mind. In this sense, science may be understood to be only one means by which reality and creation is perceived. As such, science is but one window from which scientists observe and study the universe. Further, it must be noted that the instrumentation of science, however sophisticated it may be in our high-tech society, only serves to record and probe the lowest of all levels of existence. Some scientists and philosophers have taken this, the gross, material level, to be the only reality in existence. Clearly this is a case of the rebellion of reason against intellect. For example, J.R., the noted and influential British philosopher, said, "We do not deny a priori that the mystic is able to discover truths by his own special methods. We wait to hear what are the propositions which embody his discoveries, in order to see whether they are verified or confuted by our own empirical observations. But the mystic, so far from providing propositions which are empirically verified, is unable to produce any intelligible propositions at all." He further states that since the mystic cannot reveal what he knows, or even himself devise an empirical test to validate his knowledge, he shows that his state of mystical intuition is not a genuinely cognitive state. Also, for example, Franz Alexander, representing a breed of Western investigation called psychoanalysis, states, "The obvious similarities between schizophrenic regressions and the practices of yoga and Zen merely indicates that the general trend in Oriental cultures is to withdraw into the self from an overbearingly difficult physical and social reality." Philosophically, both examples may be referred to as cases of category error which occur when instrumentation, from one realm of knowledge, tries to take the role of another which is not equipped or qualified to do so. Ken Wilber describes the way in which knowledge can be acquired by three modes of knowing. The eye of flesh is linked to sensory experiences or empirical knowledge, capable of detection by the five human senses or their extensions. The eye of reason is the domain of philosophy and psychology, reason and logic, and the eye of contemplation is the realm of mysticism and spirituality. He further states that a higher eye cannot be reduced to nor explained in terms of a lower eye, that is, that each eye is valid and useful in its own field, but commits a fallacy when it attempts, by itself, to fully grasp higher or lower realms, this being the case, as in Alexander's comments or questions concerning proof of mystical truth in the empirical realm, by the eye of the flesh, are meaningless, since this realm, being lower than the realm of reason and contemplation, is not equipped to grasp the truth of higher realms. Wilber's proposed paradigm to integrate the realms of empiricism, rationalism, and spirituality, if it was ever possible to achieve, is an important contribution in establishing a bridge between the scientific and the spiritual. This model suggests a rediscovery of the anatomy of being, which places each mode of existence, the corporeal, the psychic, and the spiritual in its place. This rediscovery can also serve to clarify certain phenomena which modern science is forced to reject but in which society as a whole displays great interest. Such are, for example, the phenomena connected with the subtle or psychic substance which has a cosmic as well as human component. The multitude of phenomena connected with this order are left for occultists to deal and play with. By being banished from the official scientific worldview, they have not by any means been made to disappear from man's life and society. Their very exclusion from the domain of reality accepted by science has both impoverished the present conception of the total science of things, and led to the cultivation of dangerous practices by all kinds of occultist organizations that only increase from day to day. One could say that modern man has not experienced the psychic substance within nature to the same extent as men of other ages, due to a difference of his own makeup as well as the constitution of the ambience around him. However, to the extent that he has experiences of this kind, they are relegated to a category whose negation by official scientific circles does not in any way make them less real, or their effect on society any less felt. The exponential rise in societies and publications associated with Spiritism and the like, amidst the supposedly most scientific age of human history, should at least be a source of reflection. Rossack characterizes the new religions, and the turning to the occult and the mystical as part of man's raw search for transcendence. That is, it is a reflection of the need and serious desire by society to rediscover the eye of contemplation or to restore reason in its proper place, subservient to the intellect. Likewise, the delineation of the grades of reality could again elucidate and clarify the traditional sciences such as alchemy, astrology, etc., whose true significance lies in their symbolic meaning and the correspondence and concordance between stages of reality. The loss of this metaphysical knowledge has made these sciences appear as superstitions, contrary to both reason and experience. Again, their rejection by the official scientific view has not by any means caused them to disappear. With a total disregard for the symbolic meaning of these sciences, whose real sense has long been forgotten, this enormous interest only fosters superstition in the true sense of the word and adds to the confusion of thought. No amount of attack by scientists can help to overcome or stop it. Only a metaphysical knowledge, by the eye of contemplation, of the grades of reality, and the correspondences based on them, could again place these sciences in their proper perspective and neutralize the harm that is brought about through a misunderstanding of their teachings. In line with Wilber, Rossack, Weber, and Bohm, to mention a few, in most recent times, we have begun to experience a shift in attitude by the proponents of the official scientific circle, largely due to the new discoveries in the areas of brain research and the latest frontiers of physics. For example, Willis Harman in his book Global Mind Change speaks of 3 levels of knowing which he calls M1, M2 and M3. M stands for metaphysics. He classifies M1 as the physical reality understood and studied by empirical science, the eye of the flesh, M2 as matter, energy, the dualism of Descartes mind, matter, the eye of reason, and M3 as mind, spirit consciousness, the eye of contemplation. He says that presently there is a contest going on among those 3, that serious dialogue is being carried out between scientists, philosophers, and mystics, and that there is rather a sense of uncertainty as to which way our social institutions will be guided. Another example is a recent publication, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. The book focuses on the works of physicist David Bohm and neurophysiologist Carl Pribram, 2 of the world's most eminent scientists in their respective fields. Talbot describes the theory of the holographic universe, which purports to explain many unsolved puzzles of physics and of the broader area of psychic sciences, such as telepathy, out-of-body and near-death experiences, lucid dreams, and even religious and mystical experiences such as feelings of cosmic unity and miraculous healings. Our worldview is rapidly changing. For now, change is the only constant. In times of increasing pessimism over global problems, a corresponding optimism may be arising through the rediscovery of who we really are and what our potential can be. During the past decade, we have learned more about the brain, the mind, and the formation of reality than we have known throughout all the preceding millennia. In confirmation with the new image of reality emerging from quantum physics, this new and emerging view of ourselves shatters our previously held beliefs. The rediscovery of consciousness opens extraordinary possibilities and new potentials for our lives. This transformation is altering the way we interpret science and influences all other aspects of human endeavors. At last, after 400 years of domination, the Cartesian Newtonian vision of a mechanistic and material reality is being dismantled. Now a paradigm shift is occurring, which is recasting the foundations of the cultural belief structure of Western industrial society. This paradigm propels us now to go beyond the rigid patterns of our mind-brain, and into another realm of knowing which is beyond conventional thought and decision-making. This means engaging a new form of thinking, seeing ourselves and visioning the world around us in a completely different way, radically altering our perceptions of reality forever. How we evolve, learn, create, and relate to our universe and holoverse needs to be re-evaluated. John Naisbitt, in his earlier book, Megatrends, says, "Technology and our human potential are the two great challenges and adventures facing humankind today. The great lessons we must learn from the principle of high-tech, high-touch is a modern version of the ancient Greek ideal, balance. We must learn to balance the material wonders of technology with the spiritual demands of our human nature." Also in the monumental encyclopedic work of the Al-Ismaili Muslims of the 10th century known as the Rasail, Epistles, of the Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity, the ideal and holistic view of man is given as being of East Persian derivation, Arabic in faith, of Iraqi, that is, Babylonian, education, a Hebrew in astuteness, a disciple of Christ in conduct, as pious as a Syrian monk, a Greek in the individual sciences, an Indian in the interpretation of all mysteries, but lastly and especially, a Sufi in his whole spiritual life. Do like, subscribe, and share if this episode resonates with your own spiritual search. To explore over 2,000 titles on Christian parapsychology and spiritual wisdom, and so much more, become a member of CFPSS today for just £5. Visit churchesfellowship.co.uk/membership.
You have been listening to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies. To find out more, please visit www.churchesfellowship.co.uk.